Foodman Learning Solutions provides the essential tools to implement and supervise your firm's corporate governance program. Through our e-learning platform, you can access a wide variety of courses based on industry best practices in all areas of regulatory compliance, including our FATCA and CRS professional certification that will prepare you to assume the function of responsible officer for FATCA and CRS. The Foodman Help Desk is your compliance resource in all areas of regulatory compliance. This powerful tool can be used to clarify regulations and receive training. The Help Desk will give you access to a network of specialists that support hundreds of financial institutions. Contact us through our website, www.foodmanpa.com, or send us an email to info@foodmanpa.com, or just give us a call at 305-365-1111. At Foodman, complexity is our advantage.
Welcome to this month's webinar. We will be covering maximizing efficiency, leveraging technology and AI for a scalable client risk assessment. For that, I'm going to lead the host, Stanley Foodman. Stanley is the CEO of Foodman CPAs Advisors. Stanley, please go ahead and welcome everyone again.
Good morning to everybody. Welcome to our webinar. We have the honor and the pleasure of interviewing Delfina Chain, who's the founder of Chaindots. Delfina Chain is, like I said, the founder and the CEO of Chaindots, which is a collaborative risk platform for companies to connect with their third parties and improve business operations securely. She has a background in business development, intelligence analysis, and compliance, with a strong expertise in risk management and cybersecurity. Delfina is currently pursuing further education in innovation and entrepreneurship, and she's already a highly skilled professional with a diverse skill set and impressive educational background. Delfina, welcome.
Thank you, Stanley and team and everyone here in the webinar. It's a pleasure participating and super excited to share what I've learned during these years in the industry.
So Delfina, let's start with a couple of questions about you. What provoked you? What made you decide to go into business for yourself in Chaindots? What was the provocation for this?
Okay, so basically, I saw a problem, myself and my team, right? We identified something that it's very, very painful for most of the companies, no matter in what industry they are, that it's the famous concept of due diligences. I think that everybody here heard, answered, or sent a due diligence one or many times during their lifetime. And we saw this as a huge, huge inefficient way to address risk, right? We are basically all doing the same questions all over again. And you are basically also answering those questions all over again. So we thought that, hey, here there's a huge problem. We can try to solve it in a more efficient, tech-savvy way. And basically that was the problem that, what the starting point to build Chaindots. But my ultimate goal, and this is something why I wake up every day and I do what I do, is I really want to build and no matter how cliche it sounds, I really want to build a more transparent and safer world for all. And I think that us working in these industries really help into those missions. So that's my ultimate goal.
Okay. And where did you go to school? Well, where did you get your education? Where did you get what are your roots?
Yes. So when I was born in a country named Argentina, South America, I studied law in the University of St. Andrews. I'm a lawyer. And then I continued my education at Stanford University in California, my business education. I also studied cybersecurity at Harvard and compliance at George Washington. So I'm a big fan of learning continuously and trying to understand where the world goes in terms of know-how.
Okay. So now jumping right into it, what are you seeing as emerging opportunities in the space that you're occupying right now as a company in Chaindots?
Yes. So as I was mentioning before, and very related to a topic of today and of our webinar, we see every day and more, we connect with different companies worldwide, right? Like if you want to hire a vendor, if you want to open bank account to a company, if you want to prospect a company, if you want to engage in any type of relationship, you need to know who you are engaging with, right? The famous KYC, but here it's more complex because it's QIB, know the business that's in front. And this, if we take it globally, right? Because we're not only engaging, if you're a US company, you're no longer engaging with US companies, you're engaging with companies all over the world, Mexican, Chinese, Spanish, Chilean companies. Understanding who you have in front is every day more complex. And we usually do it very, very manually. So I see a huge opportunity in trying to automate and scale up how we handle the know your counterparty in a more efficient way, and not only in a moment in time, but in a continuous way. The economics, the business relationships, everything requests this more efficient way to do things. And basically, we are targeting that. We are targeting how we make companies connect in a safer, more transparent way, but also more agile way, skipping up many manual processes and trying to enhance them with technology.
You mentioned scaling up. For those who don't know what that means, could you define what you mean by doing things in scale or scaling up?
Yes, super interesting. When scaling up means thinking in not only hundreds of clients or hundreds of interactions, we're talking about millions. We're talking about building like a building, but with solid foundations that help you build as many floors as you want. So maybe you start with 100, evaluating 100 clients, 1,000, but then you need to do this for millions or thousands of thousands. So you need to really start thinking smart from day zero and enabling technology to build this at a large scale. So scaling up is basically that, like building the first blocks in a way that allow you to onboard more clients, build longer relationships, build more efficient relationships, start operations overseas, many of the things that today businesses require us to think that way, but it's important for compliance and risk teams to also work along with these business needs from day zero when they build the risk programs, the compliance programs.
Sure.
And
so do you think it's fair to say that you're creating, in the process of creating, a huge, I'm going to say huge, a very large database that can be shared by all the users of your software for purposes of knowing their customers, knowing who they're doing business with, but it's a shared database that's almost on a subscription basis. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Like imagine it as a LinkedIn of risk. I like to speak about LinkedIn. It's like the LinkedIn of risk, where like I know like who you are, right, Stanley? And if I don't know, I enter LinkedIn and I see who your friends are, and I see your excellent reviews and many things about you. Bueno, but how do I know my vendor? How do I know my client, my business client? That's what we are going, and that's what we're building here at Chaindots.
Well, so tell me about the challenges that you're facing for assessing risk and compliance.
Well, if I think about the challenges that we see, not only our company, but our clients, and we really like to hear more than speak, and we really like to understand the pains of AML, compliance, information security officers, and everything. We see many, many challenges. The first point, and it goes very related to what we're speaking here, is the dependency in manual processes. And here there's one very important item that I like to mention. Many companies, when we speak, tell you, no, I have everything digitalized. For example, when I onboard a customer, I send them this link, I ask them to send me these documents via digital. Yes, you're not longer using a paper. You're sending a Google form, you're sending an invitation to a portal. You're using basically a digital format. But when you do like a triple click, what's the next step after you collect that information? You're seeing humans, and you're seeing many, many analysts reading those documents, understanding those documents, and translating that documentation into a risk score and a risk profile because of legal definitions and regulations. So the first huge challenge is, let's not fool ourselves. Let's not think that we are doing something digital only because we are requesting things digitally. Let's try to really shake up things and do everything digital and avoid analysts doing the extra human work of reviewing the AML policy, understanding if the AML policy complies with, seeing all of the documents, and then translating it to risk. We are automating all of that process. And one thing that I like to say before I continue is, here, I'm not saying that humans should be replaced by tech. I think, and this is something that we always debate, because especially when we work with professionals, like we work with risk and compliance officers. Here, what we're saying is, let's power our brains with tech. Let's use our brains for smarter things. Let's use our risk and compliance minds to build new businesses, to target new industries. Well, that's something that I like to mention in the middle of this, because it's very, very important for us not to feel replaced by tech, right? That's the first challenge. The fake idea of digitalization, it should be 100% digital. The second huge challenge that we see, and especially like my team always says this, that we are operating in silos. I would love to understand, like, who is here listening, but if you are in an anti-money laundering team, in a compliance, in a legal team, in an information security team, in a fraud team, what we see is that many times inside the companies or institutions, we are using different resources to do very similar chores, and that we aren't collaborating between internal teams, or the ways we collaborate are very inefficient. So maybe, especially, I don't know, for example, vendor risk assessment. Information security teams will check some things, legal teams will check other things, compliance teams will check other things, and when do they speak? And how do these teams speak?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because companies tend to be siloed internally. And I think that my experience is that in looking at companies, larger companies, not small, we call mom and pop companies, but larger companies with significant payroll, that people tend to stake out territories and defend those territories ferociously. And there's a fear of losing their territory or somehow being diminished by the sharing, or the regular sharing, or the frictionless sharing of information between all the other teams and my team, for example. So I think this is a challenge that you're facing with respect to risk and risk evaluation. With that said, what are the trends that you're seeing emerging in this industry that we're discussing, given what you're doing with Chaindots?
One thing that we're seeing a lot is that once teams, especially like risk teams and compliance teams and these teams, like they're in a very internal battle, right? We were speaking that before we started the webinar privately, but there's a huge internal battle, right? Business teams want to build new businesses, and traditional businesses, for example, traditional financial institutions are competing with a fintech right now. So they need to launch new products. They need to launch new services, because every day more you have more competition. How does that translate to internal teams? Business teams want to onboard, want to transact with higher risk industries, because the pool of regular clients, is being saturated. Nowadays, like, you have thousands of different like banks where you can open a bank account. You have n amounts of fintech from your house. You can open a bank account. It's like you no longer have the nearest bank to open a bank account. Now you compete with your cell phone. So the nearest bank needs to change their strategy, because they're competing with not only the ones in the block, they're competing with the world's bank. So what we're seeing here is that this translates to operating with the need or the desire of many businesses to operate with higher risk industries. For example, like crypto, gambling, banking as a service, and we can touch upon that, remittances, many industries that before were like banned or bad words for for the risk and compliance team, but now they are almost like a must. And businesses teams are asking their compliance and AML and risk teams, and the leadership is build me models that can mitigate those risks, because the business needs to interact with these businesses. Like we need to open these bank accounts. We need to understand this, and there's a huge opportunity because the risk and compliance professionals that really know about these type of risks and how to mitigate them can no longer be only a control area, but a business area. They can enable businesses. So you're like the compliance risk 2.0.
You're saying that the compliance area of a company can be used or can be an asset in the marketing or sales side of the company, for assisting them to have new models by which they can sell.
Yes, what I'm saying here is that if we as risk officers enable good risk models to mitigate, to separate in these high risk industries, there's always colors, right? Like you have a high risk industry, but inside that high risk industry, you have different type of companies. The ones that you won't want to interact with because you can identify they're doing things wrong and you don't want to have them in your pool of clients. And you have the ones that operate in a very high risk industry, but have controls, have mitigants, have good compliance programs. So I think the magic is trying to differentiate between all of these and being able to interact with these, because they are very, very, they're very attractive as a business model. That's something that we're seeing every day more. And these banks, fintech, are using our platform to basically differentiate in these type of industries, which one are like the good ones, which one are the ones that are so in terms of controls, and that they have to move away from their pool. But that's a huge opportunity, and we're seeing every day more banking as a service as another very interesting industry that requires a lot from our compliance and risk teams.
So given what we've just been speaking about, what are you seeing happening in technology, tech, that is revolutionizing risk assessment?
Different things. First of all, as I was mentioning before, the capability of really, really automating the full cycle, right? Not only the obtention or the request of documentation. That's something that I would say that 80% of the businesses already have. You still have like the financial institutions that require the client to go and provide like the paper. But the first thing is we are starting to see like the full cycle in all. That's one thing.
What do you mean by the full cycle?
With a full cycle, I mean the fully automation of the request of the information, the data processing, and for that, artificial intelligence is a key. Helps us make our brains smarter and helps us like automate more things. The understanding of those documentations nowadays, there's plenty of options to basically ask critical questions to the documents and identify in a faster and smarter way the things that you have to really read on those documents. Let's put a very easy example. You are opening a bank account because you offer correspondent banking services, right? And the bank you're opening a bank account will send you their AML policy, their fraud policy, compliance, manuals, many things. You have two options. You do it the old school. You have like analysts reading and trying to figure out and looking for the paragraphs and then putting it in the legacy of your client, or you have the option of building this at scale and using AI to identify those key sections of those documents that you really need to identify, analyze, and basically translate into a risk score. So when I'm speaking about full cycle, I'm speaking about the collection, the data analysis, And then the other part, the making the intelligence questions to those documents. And there is where you need humans nowadays. Like we aren't replaceable. We have to train these models. The model won't do the work fully for us. Our analyst has to ask themselves a question, okay, what do I see as an analyst in an AML policy? I see this. Okay, I train the system to see this. And eventually, the third part of the full cycle is how we translate those ifs into risk scores. And that is also very easily automated. If you are able to build technology to automate all of the risk matrices and a text, a question, an answer, you translated it into a risk score, and then you have basically the risk scoring of your client. But all of that is a long chain of things that nowadays in most companies have heavily human interactions.
Given all of this great stuff that's happening, how do you see the government's perspective? You're dealing with governments from every country in the world, actually, and they all have a different interpretation of what the various guideposts are. For example, from what's called GAFI, or the Financial Action Task Force, FinCEN in the United States, the EU, the United Nations, each country's financial integrity unit. It just goes on and on. How is this all mixing in with and being affected by and working with from the perspective of government? What are you seeing?
We see two things depending on what side we are. Where are we standing? Like, we have the fortune enough to work, as you were mentioning, with several regulators, and we work in projects. This is public notice, but we work in projects helping governments automate many of their processes. So the challenges private companies have, multiply them by thousands. That's a challenge the government has, because the government has to monitor the WIFs, the FUIs of the world, have to do it at a large scale. So it's amazing. I'm very passionate about this, but it's the same problem at a larger scale, like getting to know who is doing what and what controls they have. When you're at the government side, you have thousands. When you're a private institution, you have your clients that could be millions, thousands, etc. So here it's very interesting, because the public space, and this is usually how it works, can learn a lot from the private space. Like, when you have smart regulators, when you have the adequate people in the governmental institutions, they can learn a lot about how private companies are doing this at a larger scale and try to enhance their own monitoring systems with technology. Okay, it's going to take longer, because we all know how public space works. It's slower, like you have to move many things, and we're talking about millions of data sources, but they have the same challenges we have. That said, when the two parts have the same challenge, the dialogue should be easier if we have a good relationship with the regulator and you have an open regulator, because you're both facing the same challenges. With that, what we see as the most efficient thing is when you work collaboratively, and when you share what you've learned in the private sector with the public sector, and what went wrong, what went well, what did it work to automate processes, what didn't. On another note, we of course see like there's other type of challenges on the public sector, as for example, data privacy, information security, there's business continuity, like there's many things that we see like huge fails in government institutions, and they are also organizations, they also fail, like they are also being cyber attacked, they are also having data breaches, they are also having many of these challenges we are having too. But of course, whenever we're speaking about databases, whenever we're speaking about clients' information, whenever we're speaking about PI, there's also a huge concern, and we also have to work together on how we're protecting our users, right? Our consumers. But let's not forget, again, they have the same challenges because they're also being cyber attacked.
So if that's the case, how do you see the cooperation side of this working out? We go to conferences, all of us. Some of us speak at conferences, some of us go as students, some of us do both, and we go to learn, and the regulators get up, the government, and give us the government perspective. For example, when we go to the large anti-money laundering conference in Miami, put on by FIBA every year, the regulators get up and they talk about something called the risk-based approach to doing business, but they never quite tell anybody what it means. They never give people guideposts. They don't give people any sort of guidance as to what constitutes an effective risk-based approach. They just say you're on your own, figure out your appetite for risk, and figure up your own matrices for determining risk and quantifying risk. And you're on your own. And if you get into trouble, we're there to make your life difficult. So the question I have given all of that is, Chaindot is creating this database through hundreds of thousands of people and businesses worldwide. And so, you're also assisting government with doing the same thing. So at some point, how do you see the collaboration occurring? Because their points of view are completely different, and they're not giving any guidance as to how to mitigate risk and how to take this risk-based approach that they speak about. And by the way, as a CPA, I can tell you we're told to use it also for doing auditing and other tasks. But my question always is, well, from the regulator point of view, which could be the SEC, it could be FinCEN, it could be a financial integrity unit. How are you going to work with them? How do you see this collaboration occurring?
Okay, great question. I love it. So
I try to do it. I try to give good questions.
You are doing excellent. Thank you, Stanley. You're making my life so easy.
It's my job.
Yes. The first point here, and it relates to when I started, is the ultimate goal. And we never have to forget that, as much as, and many times we we are compliance officers who are risk, and we're tired and we're stressed and we have the regulator on top of us, and it's stressful. Our work is painful. But first of all, we don't have to forget, and this is something that when we speak, especially when we are having these regulator visits and everything, we should share. And if we don't, I think that's a question mark. We should be doing it to ourselves, right? We should share the ultimate goal. What is our ultimate goal? Protecting the users, the customers, preventing money laundering, terrorist finance, and basically building a safer world, right? And let's not forget this, why we're doing what we're doing, why we want to avoid money laundering situations, why we want to avoid financial terrorism situations. So if we always remember that, we're sitting with our regulator and we should share the same goal. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, but eventually we should. That's a starting point. Once we position ourselves as, okay, we should work in the same team. Okay, you have to audit my controls, but we're both trying the same, especially control areas. It's easier. Okay, and when you make public and verbally explicit all of these, I think as a regulator, I've worked in regulators before, I think that the conversation starts different because I'm no longer being your police. I'm trying to understand your pains, and okay, of course, if you're doing things wrong, as a regulator, I should tell you you're doing things wrong, but we're starting with the same goal. Then as Chaindots, and this is speaking my personal opinions and as a company, we should, as private companies, is my thoughts, always foster collaboration with regulators, and that's always what we try to do, is make visible to regulators what we're doing, how we're doing it, and how we're thinking risk management. As companies that build these kind of solutions, I think that, and this is helpful for our clients, we should always be auto-auditing ourselves and asking for regulators' opinions on what we're doing and how we're doing it. Of course, there will be always better ways to do things, but those better ways will eventually appear once we start that conversation. Many times it's, as you say, Stanley, it's, live your own adventure, as one of my team members always says. He says, live your own adventure and build your risk management. And if you fail, you'll have the corresponding penalty, right? I always tell my clients, let's avoid that instance. Let's try to establish that dialogue before the audit comes. Let's say, hey, I hired this, I'm building this. Let's communicate. I have an excellent client that, for me, it's like the star client, because I always say, like, I wish everybody did this your way before targeting a new industry, before launching it and putting the communications out loud, and they will invite and tell them, the regulator, hey, we're targeting this industry, we have a game plan, this is what we're doing, this is what we're thinking, and then they launch it. It's not reactive, it's proactive. The regulator won't say no. They will tell you no in the audit, but they will establish that continuous dialogue. In some countries it works, in others not. Every country is different, every regulator is different, but that's like something that I always try to communicate to our clients, that don't hide the secrets, try to establish a communication before.
Right. And of course, when we look at the regulations that are published from the United States, for example, they always are quick to tell the institutions that are being regulated that if you do have a problem and you tell us about it ahead of time, if there's going to be a penalty, it'll be diminished significantly or maybe even eliminated completely. But if you try to hide it, it's going to be a bigger problem when it's uncovered. So tell me, have you had any success stories? Tell me about your successes.
Yes, we had a very good success story. Like, but I like telling this one because I have authorization of another client. Basically, this was a bank that wanted to build all of their digital strategy, right? Like, they wanted to be the first bank in Latin America to offer banking as a service. We have two success, many, but these are the ones that I'm able to share. So this bank, they had clients all over the place. The business team was very, very smart about identifying industries that needed banking services, banking as a service, and that this would, of course, like, bring red lights into the regulators. Speaking about regulators, right? Like, you're positioning yourself as the new digital financial institutions that offers banking as a service. You're targeting.
What is banking as a service?
Great. So banking, that's what, yes, I should have explained that before. So
don't worry about it. That's my part of my job is to just try to clarify for our audience some of the terminology.
Yeah, so banking as a service is basically and this is something, banking as a service relates to many of the misconceptions we have in businesses, especially like the fintech versus the banks, the virtual assets versus the banks, etc. We all need banks. We all need banks for everything. So basically, banks offering these kind of services enable other institutions to utilize their financial services to provide services to their clients. So what's the complex thing in terms of risk regarding banking as a service is, for the bank, it's no longer the client's risk. Now we're speaking about the client's risk, and the chain can go as long as you basically as a business model allows. In terms of risk, and now I'll continue with a success story, but in terms of risk, what does this mean? The bank can have the greatest KYC, KYB, know your business, know your client system, right? But it doesn't depend only on the bank's risk controls to block high-risk transactions or to basically understand the risks that they are confronting to. Now the bank depends on how the fintech or how the company utilizing those banking as a service enables and implements their controls towards their clients. So you start building a huge chain, like eternal, where it's like the same as a regulator, where basically you not only depend on your controls, you depend on the other person's control, the other company control, and like that continuously. So here the bank, and connecting to the regulators, acts sort of, and here please, like this, as a regulator. Why? Because the bank has And to enable these banking as a services has to understand the controls, the fintech that controls the other company utilizing their services has in place. If the fintech that uses a bank doesn't have good controls in place, all of that money enters a bank and it's a huge problem for the bank. And it's even worse, and there's a case that it's very interesting, it's even worse when the company that the banking as a service is providing services is not an obligated subject, like it's not regulated in terms of money law. It's not yet regulated in terms of money laundering. That happened with all of the crypto companies. There were no AML regulations in many countries targeting these companies, so they were all connecting to the banks. And the crypto companies, I don't know, I remember when we started implementing all of these, when the first conversation, I'm talking about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, okay, not now. But when we started working with these, they were, okay, do you have a compliance officer? A compliance what? Because they had no compliance. Now, this doesn't happen. I'm not saying this about currently, the industry has evolved a lot. But those are the cases that are very interesting, business speaking, for the bank, because they want to bank all of these industries or these or others, but they need to measure the controls of their clients. So banking as a service has this huge risk, the client risk. That's one thing. Our success story that I always like to tell is we helped this financial institution position themselves as the banking as a service institutions in Latin America. And it was so successful that other banks all over the place, like all over the world, came to study this use case. So they were knocking the door of this bank and asking, how did you build this? How did you convince your regulator? How did you build a efficient risk mitigation strategy to enable these financial services to all of these industries that are, that were bad words for the regulator? So it was a huge work, and it relates to many of the topics we spoke about during this conference. Collaboration. Before implementing the first building block of the system for this bank, we sat with every compliance officer of each industry they were banking. So we sat with the compliance officers of the gambling, we sat with the compliance officers of the crypto, we sat with the compliance officers of the remittances, we sat with the business teams, and we got to understand their business. That was the first thing. The bank was very interested in doing this. So first, collaboration. Started knowing the industries, and because you can't bank an industry that you don't understand, like what their products are, what the services are, what are the risks, where the questionable triple click points are. So the first was a collaboration.
Well, I think that's true of a lot of industries, by the way. We in my industry are not permitted to take on certain types of businesses without first understanding the risks involved with that business, even to the degree where the government wants to hire us. For example, we were approached by a federal agency for helping them with an investigation, an embezzlement, big embezzlement. And the first thing I wanted to know when they approached us is, well, what industry did this occur in? Let's make sure that we're the right fit to help you with this embezzlement in this industry. A lot of them have the same characteristics, and they're always the most trusted person in the organization who stole the money. But what I'm getting to is we don't just take on business anymore. At least we don't in our firm. We have to do our due diligence, and we have to know who we're doing business with. And if we don't, then we have our own regulators who come and give us a hard time about doing business with those people, and can and will. So I think what we're talking about really applies across the entire spectrum of the business environment, of the business ecosystem. So you're creating your database. I think that you're creating an opportunity to do this across all kinds of sectors of the ecosystem. I think it's great.
Thank you, Stanley. And another thing that it's important to mention that we are always trying to do is what we see in the industry, another thing is there's always companies talking about other companies, right? Like, for example, I don't want to mention any vendor, but you go to a tech and you'll see data sources and data sources and data sources. But at some point, it's important to go back to the origin of that information. And what's the origin? The company per se, the company that operates. We see many data sources speaking about other companies, but don't avoid going to the data origin. I don't know, we can Google a company and see the negative news on that company. But again, it's another company speaking about that company. It's important also for the company to be able to provide the disclaims of that negative news. It's important for the company to be able to I know you have a great compliance team and you have many controls. It's important for you to have a space where you can share all of the controls that you have, and that you can share that you are investing in this, and maybe you're weak in an area, but you're much better in another area. So that's what we're building. But going back to the success story, nothing. And related to the regulator, the bank showed all of this model and risk assessment and the software and everything, and it had a great reception. It had a great reception during very important visits. It coincided with a FAT international review. So it was like the perfect moment to obtain a 10 or a 0. The bank obtained a 10. And it's a great success story, but it took a lot of work. So that's where going again back to our first point. Like, here, we're not trying to replace compliance and risk officers. We're trying to make your professions fun and more enjoyable, and let's take away the repetitive, tedious work, and let's think about these more creative ways to solve these global challenges that we'll have every day more.
So given all of this is the next question. How are the regulators responding, given what you're doing? How do you see the regulators responding when they're dealing with large institutions as opposed to smaller institutions? For example, single location banks or versus a statewide bank or a countrywide bank. How are the regulators treating the smaller institutions with respect to their compliance and their controls? And how can Chaindot help the smaller institutions to more or less achieve the treatment that's being received by the larger institutions?
Yes. So our key clients are not like the tier 1 banks, financial institutions. So they build many of their technology by themselves. They don't rely on third parties for many things. For others, yes, but many of the things they build it. We work very well with the small size institutions, and of course we have the outliers that are huge and that we work for several years. Saying this, something very interesting that we're seeing is, before, regulators were all over the big accounts, the big sharks, right? Because a mistake in a big financial institution is the one that will appear in the newspapers, is the one that will have, we're speaking about amounts of money that we won't speak when we are speaking about smaller, medium-sized local financial institutions. Yet, every day more, everybody knows this. Not only us risk and compliance teams, money launderers also. So smaller, medium-sized financial institutions are target on a daily basis, for these kind of operations, because of course, you're not speaking about a compliance team of hundreds of analysts and hundreds of thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to implement tech. We're speaking about small institutions with limited budget, smaller teams, many things. Regulators, where we are seeing is that they are going more after these smaller institutions every day, more and more and more and more. And these institutions are 100% manual with limited resources, very, very limited. And this is when it's very, very important for think, these institutions to find technology that is, of course, not overpricey, but at the same that will do the work, that will avoid you to, have teams that you aren't able to hire because you don't have that budget to do it. So that's very important. That's when you need the full cycle of automation, because when you're a small one, you won't have budget to extend.
And this automation, I imagine, is one of the aids in keeping regulators happy. When we used to talk to people about what their job was, talking about compliance officers now, we would say your number one job is to keep your regulators comfortable and happy. So how do you do that? So a system like yours, for example, which provides all of this information and is applicable across at scale across multiple ecosystems, is something that, because it is a web-based system, and with of course the capacity for really unlimited amounts of data, which is continually updated, it seems to me that it would allow compliance officers to once their regulators understood the system, to be more comfortable with it. I want to go back to one thing you mentioned earlier in the beginning. You mentioned technology is not necessarily you're not doing this to unemployed people, and people are very valuable. And yet we know that technology does that, and it's been the single largest cause of unemployment around the world. So how are you going to help sort of prevent that from happening with what you're doing? Because I think it's going to become a question over time. It's just the nature of technology, not your technology, but the technology in general. And by the way, before you answer that, I have been notified that we have two questions. So let's see what we've got. How can I start to specialize in compliance and risk? This is a great question for you to answer if you live in Argentina. So if somebody's living in Argentina, how can that person start to specialize in compliance and risk as a career?
Okay, so first, if you're in Argentina or if you're anywhere, because luckily digitalization allows us to learn from the best teachers all over the world. That's something as a bank. Now you can decide between many banks. Now you can decide from many teachers all over the world. So if you don't find the best ones in Argentina, I'm not very objective because I was born there, so I will tell you yes. But there's plenty of certifications that you can obtain. I think that the first step is learning. Like plenty of tools. You have organizations such as FIBA, ACAMS, ACFCS. There's plenty of worldwide organizations that provide intense courses. But once you get your first course and you understand the first steps and you get like the theoretical knowledge and know-how, it's very important to go out there to the streets and start working in a fintech, in a bank, and to get to use your knowledge in practice. Very, very important.
Are there any universities in Argentina that provide this training? Because I have a prejudice in favor of university-based education as opposed to private organizations, because they're not regulated. And as a result of not being regulated, it leaves some doubt in my mind. And I'm certified by several of them, but my feeling is that university level education is probably the way to go. But I want to know what you think about that, especially with respect to this question.
Yes, universities plenty. So, and I'm a teacher at several. USEMA, Universidad del SEMA, we did a great course a couple of months ago. Very interesting. Universidad Torcuato Di Tella, they also have a great program, and I'm not a teacher there, but I know several friends of mine are teachers there, and they are fantastic.
Okay.
There, and then afterwards, it was an anonymous question, but you can find me in LinkedIn, send me a message, and I will happily share different options and courses and everything for you to start. And if I know open roles at companies, I'm also open to sharing that.
We had one other question. ¿En cuál país de Latinoamérica fue el caso de la experiencia positiva? When you were talking about a positive case, what country did that occur in? And by the way, if you don't want to answer that question directly because it might expose the name of the client, that's okay also.
I put 3 countries because then we replicated it.
Okay, that's great. That's great. So I think this has been great. I've enjoyed this thoroughly. This is how I like to conduct these things. I like to just let people go and just ask questions and watch them educate me. It's good. It's really good. And thank you for this. So to everybody, you can find Delfina on the web at Chaindots. She's very open to answering any questions that you have with respect to what she is doing with her company, the concept of scaling, and the concept of having what is actually an open database of information worldwide through this subscription that her company offers to the software that she's providing. And I think it's something that is going to continue to grow. And I think it's worthwhile, and I believe it's worthwhile to reach out to her to find out any other information you'd like to have about what Chaindots and can offer and what Delfina is able to offer to your companies and to your institutions. And with that, I think we're done unless you have any other comments. There's 2 more.
2 more.
One is thank you. You're welcome. This is from Delia Matilde Ferreira Rubio. Great name. And then there's an anonymous person. ¿Hay algún indicador que permite medir la eficiencia? Okay, I'll let you go ahead and answer this.
I'm trying to find it.
It's an anonymous attendee. If there's an indicator that permits you to measure the efficiency of the process that you're automating with respect to client due diligence, that doesn't diminish human resources.
Yes.
And that's yet sufficient to justify the investment in the technology.
Yes, several. They have to be more than one. So you have different indicators. How long does a client, so I'll give you a couple, like how long does a client take to reply and provide information? That's very important. Like you need to understand how you're not only helping your team's work, but also the client's experience. That's one. How much time do you take to have all of the full process compared to how many human hours you have? You have, of course, human hours, costs, etc. How much time do you spend with a full process since a customer provides information until like you have all of the risk profile of your client? That's another one. Another one that's more interesting for business teams is when you are able to work along, of course, from a compliance side. When you have to say no, you have to say no. I'm here, I'm not inviting all of the compliance officers to start saying yes to everything, right? But when you are able to show how you developed a risk matrix for an industry, and then you compare how much money did the bank obtained, okay, due to enabling that industry, the financial institution, that's the best return on investment, because before you had to say no, but now you have a great risk matrix, a good system in place, and the bank earns that money, and that money isn't any longer a win from the business team. It's also a win from the compliance team that was smart enough to develop the control system.
Yes, you were. So I think it's safe to say that what you just did was you addressed the question I asked earlier about the possibilities for unemployment. But in actuality, what you're really saying is the system allows for greater automation, digital automation, which allows the bank to significantly increase its volume on a cross-border basis, almost without a limit.
Yes.
That's what makes this so exciting, because you don't have to diminish your team or the size of your team in order to get these results, because now the amount of time necessary to do these tasks becomes reduced so that the team can then be involved in greater and greater amount of business, which was the answer to my question. And I want to thank the questioner, the audience member, for sending us that question. Thank you very much. We have one more question in here. No, this was it. So it was live. Okay, so I think that's it. We've already done this. So are there any other questions before we leave? We have about maybe 2 minutes. Okay.
Thank you very much, Stanley, Foodman team. It was a pleasure. Really enjoyed speaking with you. Thanks for a question. As Stanley said, you can send me a message whenever you want.
Okay, guys. Have a wonderful day, everybody in the audience. Delfina, thank you very much for spending time with us. We appreciate it. And we'll see you at another time soon, I hope. Take care.
You.
Bye-bye.